Hi, this is Amy, and this is another edition of the Fascia-Informed Therapist. Actually, this is an Encore edition. There's been a lot going on. I haven't produced a podcast lately, and if you've listened to any of the previous podcasts, then you probably know that I just closed down 2 locations, one that I'd been at for almost 9 years and the other 2 years, and condensed down into one very small location that is intended to sort of be the wind down to my clinical practice, although I don't know that I'm going to be able to give up the clinical practice completely, probably ever. I guess we'll see what happens. And then another transition we're in right now is our therapist, Caitlin Rambo, who if you've been listening, you've heard her on other podcasts. She has decided to move back closer to home, and we are going to miss her tremendously. She's an incredible OT and an incredibly fascia-informed therapist as well. So, consequently, that means more clients are coming back on my schedule and Maddie's schedule for now. So it's been busy. It's been a state of transition, and I'm not replaying a podcast simply to replay it. I've also decided to add something new. So there's some models out there that are similar, where you listen to the podcast and then you can go get some continuing ed related to it. So you're listening anyway, so why not rack up some continuing education credits in the process? So I've taken one of the most popular podcasts, which is the Huston podcast, which was episode number 78. And that was all about stress and how that transitions physiologically through the fascial system into disease. This is a theory by an MD, Patricia Huston, and it makes a lot of sense to me. So that's probably why it's one of the most popular editions, is because we're all looking for a better understanding of how stress translates. So anyway, how it works is I'll put a link in the show notes, and that will take you right to the Podia website, my Podia website, where you can find all the different online courses that I have. But this is just be a 1 hour CE, $15. It's a way that you can help support the podcast, because I do not monetize it in any way. I am the only advertiser on this podcast. So keep listening, and then if you find one that is particularly interesting to you, if this goes well, if people actually go and use this as continuing education, then I will take more of the popular episodes. And if I know I've got a good article that a lot of people will be interested in, I will just go ahead and start translating those into educational opportunities as I go along. So this is sort of an experiment, and we'll see how it works. And I love doing this podcast. I am continually amazed at how many listeners there are, both here in the United States and well beyond. The initial episode is up to just scratching 1,000. And then many of the podcasts are surpassing 400 and 500 downloads, which is just warms my heart for such a niche podcast. So I'm thrilled. I mean, we're not up there in the millions, but who knows? Maybe someday. You never know what's around the corner. So thank you again for listening. I hope you'll take advantage of the continuing education and help support me and continuing my podcast efforts and getting important fascia science information out there to you, and how I think we can use it clinically. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Fascia-Informed Therapist podcast, designed for health and wellness practitioners interested in fascia science. I'm Amy Mayer, occupational therapist, practice owner, author, and educator with more than 30 years of experience using fascia techniques across many settings. Each episode brings practical insights and thought-provoking conversations to help you expand your skills and better serve your clients. Let's get started. Hi, this is Amy, and this is another edition of the Fascia-Informed Therapist. And today we're talking about an article that I've wanted to get out to you for a while. I'm not sure why I sat on it quite so long. There's a lot to it. There's a little complexity here. And to be honest, when I find something like this and I find it really interesting, before I want to turn around and push it back out to you all, I feel like I really have to understand it fairly well. So I take the time to read through the article, to take notes, and then I sort of map out how I understand what she's saying. And then I think about, well, how would this apply to my practice? And how can I use this information in a practical way? So that's all what I want to share with you today. So this is an article published in 2022. It's called "A Sedentary and Unhealthy Lifestyle Fuels Chronic Disease Progression by Changing Interstitial Cell Behavior." This was published in the Frontiers in Physiology journal, and the author is Patricia Huston, and she's a family physician and researcher. So she's really asking us to think differently about chronic disease and specifically organ functioning. And she's saying that the real story is happening in, you guessed it, the fascia. So we're going to walk through her 6-level hierarchical network analysis. And that maybe sounds more complex than it really is. But she's saying that the interstitial cells can either support healing and restore healthy tissue the way that they're designed to, or when pushed by chronic stress, sedentariness, or poor diet or other lifestyle aspects, that will then drive inflammation and in turn fibrosis in the fascia, and then we experience long-term organ dysfunction. So she sees chronic disease as a stalled healing process that is likely reversible through lifestyle change, movement, and restoring healthy interstitial function. So we've talked in previous podcasts on different kinds of movement that is really good for the fascia. We've talked about lifestyle aspects before as well. So she's saying that these things stall healing if they are persistent, but we can also use those same things to reverse the stalled healing and get our body functioning the way it should. So if you work with the fascial system, and I'm certainly assuming that you do if you're listening to this podcast, I hope this episode gets you thinking as well about how our body works from that perspective and how you can use this content to not only help your clients, but help yourself, because I always want the practitioners thinking about keeping yourself healthy in addition to how you can help our clients. A lot of us are built in a way that we really want to help people. We want to make people feel better, but we need to be thinking about that for ourselves as well. And I can guarantee you that I do. I apply all this stuff to myself because I want to age well, and I want to increase my health span, not just my lifespan. Okay, so who is Patricia Huston? As I said, she's a family physician, and she's a researcher at the University of Ottawa. Long-time public health leader, writer, and medical educator. She focuses in on chronic disease prevention, lifestyle medicine, and system-level interactions that influence health. Her work bridges medicine, physiology, lifestyle science, public health, and the emerging research in the area of fascia. So why is she proposing this theory? We spend millions on chronic disease, and we really don't have good outcomes. I would even argue that here in the States, they're getting worse. We have, I think I talked about this last episode, that the generations now are the first generations being born that are actually going to have shorter lifespans than the generations before them. And I think fascia's, when we get so excited about fascia's the answer. But fascia is something that is going to help explain a lot of problems. Now, everything is multifactorial. Everything is, and everything in our body interacts with everything else. But putting this layer of understanding the fascia, I think, is just going to help so many people with so many things. So she says, lifestyle is known to influence chronic disease, but how lifestyle gets under the skin, so to speak, to influence cellular behavior is, or has been, unclear. And she's saying the missing link here is the fascia, the interstitium, and the cells that live within it. Specifically, she's talking about macrophages and fibroblasts. Her theory frames chronic disease not as isolated organ failure, but as a stalled healing process occurring within that fascial microenvironment. This view has major implications for prevention, early intervention, and of course, I think what we do as fascia-informed therapists. There's so much here that we can talk to our clients about to help them and their healing trajectory. Because if you are a fascia person, or fascia practitioner who is just putting people on your table and then doing what you do and then letting them walk away without teaching them some of this other stuff, I think you're doing your people a disservice. And some people will argue with me and say, well, they should learn that information elsewhere from their doctor. Sometimes it's the 17th time where somebody says you could drink more water and here's why. It finally clicks for somebody, that it finally clicks. So you could be that person who, even though other people have explained it to them, you explain it in a little bit different way, or a little way that's a little more relevant to them. And then that's going to help them move forward and make that change in their life. So don't be afraid to speak up. And maybe you don't feel like I'm an expert in lifestyle behavior. You don't have to be. There's so many things out there that are accessible to everyone. And even though you don't have a degree in nutrition, for example, and I've talked about this in another podcast, I believe, there's been so many now, we can talk about nutrition with our clients. The only thing, at least in the state of Nebraska, I can't talk to somebody about you should eat this or not eat this to cure this issue in your body. I can talk to anybody I want to about here's what healthy food looks like. Okay, you could make more whole food choices, less processed food. That is all okay for us to talk about. And some people still don't have that information, or again, you might explain it a little bit differently, a little more relevantly. Okay, so her core claim here, chronic disease, I'm going to repeat myself here and there because that's part of learning. Chronic diseases progress because unhealthy lifestyle patterns. This dysregulates the interstitial cells, the macrophages and the fibroblasts, leading to low-grade inflammation, fibrosis, and eventual organ damage. And now we're going to talk about how we make that leap. So this is her 6-level hierarchical network. So the first level that she talks about, she calls the macro environment. And that is, when we think about us as human beings, our macro environment would be the largest scale we can think about in terms of things that may constrain our lifestyles and or cause stress. So things like pandemics, things that affect large groups of people, climate events, economic instability, wars. And part of the reason that this affects people on such a macro scale is that it causes stress amongst a population. And then it can also affect things like physical activity. Like when COVID happened, there were many cities that limited how much you could be out, what you could do, the places you could go, causing stress, not able to let you do the things that you want to do, or maybe you couldn't go to work or your kids couldn't go to school. And access to basically healthy living. Gyms were shut down. Massage clinics were shut down. So the micro scale are things that limit what we do and tend to cause stress. The next level down, the social determinants of health and cultural factors. Social determinants of health are the non-medical factors that affect health outcomes. This might be cultural norms, screen times, processed food, stress culture, family and community patterns. And families, most of us have at least one person in our family that tends to cause us a little stress. Community patterns might be access to safe places to walk, or access to a grocery store that has fresh fruits and vegetables. These things shape our routines, they may shape our diet quality, our movement patterns, and how we regulate our stress. The next level is the lifestyle network. Okay, so Huston says there's general agreement that health lifestyle equals physical activity, supportive relationships, healthy diet, normal sleep, self-regulation. And she points out that one of the key components is loneliness. She specifically pointed this out in her article as something at this lifestyle level that is a big problem. And she included a recent meta-analysis of over 1,000 studies, and almost 1.5 million participants found loneliness had an effect size similar to smoking and obesity in terms of the increased risk of chronic disease and mortality. And the reference on that is Villa 2021. So an unhealthy lifestyle, sedentariness, dysregulation, poor diet, chronic stress. So she describes lifestyle as this pivot point between external and internal systems. Because if we have those first two levels, the social determinants of health and the macro, the big picture stuff, if we are experiencing those things, but we're still creating a more healthy lifestyle, that could protect us. But if we don't, that's where things can pivot to the negative. Okay, so if we're staying in fight or flight and we're not practicing that healthy lifestyle, we're not going to counteract that stress, and then we're going to keep tumbling down the hierarchy here. The next level she calls the meso-level environment, and this is where lifestyle affects physiology via the nervous, endocrine, and immune system. So the autonomic nervous system begins to shift towards sympathetic overdrive. The HPA axis, or the hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal axis, becomes desensitized. And in more simple terms, when the brain perceives stress, the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland, which then tells the adrenal glands to reduce stress hormones, primarily cortisol. Cortisol helps to regulate energy, inflammation, blood pressure, and immune activity so the body can cope with challenges. Once the stress passes, cortisol feeds back to the brain to turn the system down and restore balance. So if it is desensitized, if this HPA axis is desensitized, it can't ramp you up and then calm you down like it should. It's making you less resilient. So the immune system shifts towards more inflammation. And chronic disease is not just too much inflammation alone. It's the failed resolution of inflammation due to the body being continually in the sympathetic state. And I'm going to just pause here from the article. And just today, I was explaining to a brand new client who came in, and I was explaining to him and he was talking, I always ask my clients, rate your stress level. And he was saying, oh, it's definitely high. It's definitely in the high. And so I was explaining to him about diaphragmatic breathing and how that can help you regulate your nervous system and bring you out of fight or flight into rest and digest. And I was making this imaginary line in the air and saying, this is homeostasis. Do you know what homeostasis is? Well, it's where your body functions at its best, where living things can do what they need to do. They've got the right amount of resources to keep you going and functioning on all cylinders. If you are above that line in fight or flight, and you are telling me you're in high stress all the time, your body's resources are being diverted to help you deal with that stress. And you're not even getting yourself into this homeostasis, let alone below homeostasis. I described to him as that parasympathetic, that rest and digest, and that's where your body heals itself. If you are never getting there or rarely getting there, then your body is just going to continue to get stiffer and more uncomfortable. And that resonated with him. And that's pretty much exactly what she's talking about here, but she's, as you'll find out, going to take us through the step-by-step pieces here. So in a healthy system, the sympathetic nervous system is the gas pedal and the cortisol is the brake. In chronic stress and inactivity, the gas pedal gets stuck down and the brakes stop working. The tissues keep getting the message to brace, but never get the message to soften and repair. So now we're into the microenvironment. Now we're in the fascia, the interstitial network, she calls it. Huston asserts that the interstitium is active, not passive. And when I went to school, that's what we were told, packing material. The space between the cells interact and influence one another. The microenvironment is where lifestyle choices translate into tissue behavior. When macrophages and fibroblasts become dysregulated, healing stalls, stiffness accumulates, and chronic disease slowly takes hold. So the components of this microenvironment she describes as the extracellular matrix, the ECM, the fascia, the structural scaffold. Then there's the interstitial fluid, the fluid that moves between capillaries and lymph. It carries cytokines, hormones, metabolites, nutrients, wastes, and acts as a communication medium. This is the ground substance. And then we have the interstitial cells. And again, the two key players are macrophages, which are immune regulators, and we all know what the fibroblasts are. They're the connective tissue builders and remodelers. And then the fourth is the nerve fibers, especially the sympathetic nerve endings, wrapped around capillaries and within the ECM. And they directly influence the local cells. Okay, so I'm going to explain what happens when everything's normal and healthy, and then when things are unhealthy. So in a healthy system, a local stress or injury occurs. The macrophages briefly shift into an inflammatory mode. I'm sorry, I saw just saw two clients for very long visits today. Okay, so fibroblasts help stabilize and repair tissue. Signals shift from inflammation to repair to remodeling. So the fibroblasts come in and do the repair and remodeling. Tissues return to good glide, appropriate stiffness, balanced hydration, normal function. So the macrophage cycle is surveillance, inflammation, reparative surveillance. The fibroblasts build when needed, and then they stand down. This is normal healing. So when things are unhealthy, Huston's core claim, chronic disease happens when this local healing process never completes itself. Here's how this looks. Okay, so repetitive low-level stress from things like sedentary, poor diet, chronic stress, poor sleep, obesity. They're not big injuries, but they're things that are happening to the body all the time. The macrophages get stuck. Instead of cycling normally, macrophages stay in an inflammatory state, and this is called M1. We'll review this in a second. They keep releasing inflammatory cytokines. They stop fully shifting into repair mode. This creates chronic low-grade inflammation at the tissue level. Fibroblasts respond defensively to this. Fibroblasts sense inflammation, mechanical stress, chemical signals. Their response produce more of the matrix. This increases tissue stiffness, and there's a shift toward fibrotic behavior, more fibrosis, or we want some stiffness in our fascia, but when it becomes overly stiff, we refer to that as fibrotic. At first, this is a protective thing, but over time, as the fibroblasts don't stand down, this becomes harmful. The tissue stiffness feeds back into the inflammation cycle, and this loop, the stiffer tissue sends abnormal mechanical signals. These signals activate macrophages even more. The macrophages release more inflammatory cytokines. The fibroblasts lay down more ECM, and this becomes a self-reinforcing loop. So Huston is saying that the interstitium really is the key layer here. It's not, when we have problems with our organ cells, it's not necessarily about it could be, but with this massive problem that we have, it's about the support system to these cells failing first, and then the parenchymal or the organ cells are damaged later. The interstitial cells orchestrate whether the tissue heals or deteriorates. A problem of cell behavior is in a microenvironment, not organ failure. And this is kind of a good, let me just read this to you. Every tissue has a maintenance crew. Macrophages are the inspectors, and the fibroblasts are the repair workers. In a healthy body, they fix a problem and move on. In an unhealthy lifestyle, the inspectors keep sounding the alarm, and the repair crews keep pouring concrete everywhere until the space becomes stiff, crowded, and dysfunctional. And in our case with the fascia, the concrete is the collagen. Too much collagen everywhere until things become overly stiff, crowded, dysfunctional. Okay, this layer zooms inside of cells themselves and describes what actually makes the macrophages and fibroblasts behave the way they do. Cells change their behavior based on the environment that we live in through gene expression, energy metabolism, and chemical signaling. This is epigenetics, and I know I've mentioned epigenetics on this podcast before. So in practical terms, a healthy environment, the cells express genes linked to repair, adaptability, resolution of the inflammation. In chronically stressed environment, cells express genes linked to inflammation, defense, tissue stiffening. These changes are reversible, but only if the environment changes. Okay, we're going to skip down to this part. Chemical signaling. The byproducts of metabolism do not just reflect what the cell is doing, they actually tell the cell what to do next. Okay, so here's what I was looking for. So there's a feedback loop. We talked about one feed loop already. So here's another way to look at it. Healthy loop, repair, efficient energy use, repair. Unhealthy loop, stress, inflammatory metabolism, more stress signals. This is an adaptive response to a hostile environment. The cell is doing what the cell thinks is necessary for it to survive. The intracellular network explains how chronic stress and inactivity reprogram cells from repair mode into survival mode, locking in inflammation and stiffness in the environment. Okay, why macrophages and fibroblasts are central to her theory. So in a healthy system, macrophages shift from M1 to M2, and I'm going to tell you what those two mean. In M1 means inflammatory protective emergency response. Something is wrong, lock things down, call for backup. M2 is anti-inflammatory, rebuilding, and calming. The danger has passed, clean up, rebuild, restore. So in a healthy system, macrophages shift from that M1, where it's locking things down, to M2. Okay, everything's okay, danger's gone, let's clean up the place. Then the fibroblasts remodel and the tissue normalizes. In a chronic lifestyle, cells stay in early phase healing indefinitely. Inflammation plus fibrosis over time leads to organ degeneration. And she says this pattern appears in heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, musculoskeletal degeneration, diabetes, cognitive decline. The final step is how this affects the parenchymal cells or the organ cells. And each organ has their own working cells. So the brain has the neurons, muscles have myocytes, heart has cardiomyocytes, lungs have the alveolar cells, the liver has hepatocytes. Okay, these cells do the organ's main job, and they're highly specialized, and they have a limited ability to adapt or regenerate. They depend on their support environment to survive. So in the traditional model, lifestyle damages organ cells, and then we have disease. In Huston's model, lifestyles alters the regulatory system, dysregulates interstitial cells, changes the microenvironment, and then the parenchymal cells fail. So the parenchymal damage is downstream and not the primary problem. So if we go and directly try to treat this organ and we don't pay attention to the environment in which it exists, then we're not going to have a lot of luck. I know most of us that are interested in this podcast are not people that are going to go in and treat organs. But if we can convince clients to, as they're getting something treated, think about that environment in which that organ exists within. And I know I've talked about that in terms of things like pelvic floor issues, bladder issues, paying attention to the environment in which something has to expand and contract. Huston argues for a salutogenic model, which shifts the focus from treating diagnosed disease to cultivating conditions that restore healthy behaviors. Chronic disease is stalled healing. We can support healing by optimizing the microenvironment with increased physical activity, supporting the parasympathetic system, improving diet and microbiome, reducing sympathetic overdrive, enhancing tissue mobility and fluid movement. When interstitial health improves, macrophages can return to that M2. Remember, M2 is, everything's fine. Let's get those fibroblasts in here so that they can restore things the way they were. Inflammation resolves, fibroblast slows, the fibrosis slows, and things might even reverse. So this is exciting, I think, for us. As I said when we were getting started, this is a whole nother way for us to help talk to our clients about what's going on. It's a way, if you're looking to build your practice, take this article, pass it out to your referral sources, use it to write a newsletter article, use it to create some social media to talk about this particular process and how, as someone who can help, if you're a person who does manual, I know not everybody listening does manual therapy, but even yoga or teaching people how to exercise differently so they're stretching and moving their whole body through a full range of motion, they're drinking enough water, all those things so that they can normalize their fascial system will help their body work better. And if they're being treated for something, if it's safe for them to exercise, then we can, if you're, especially, OTs and PTs, we are really good at modifying exercise to help match somebody's skills and abilities and limitations based on whatever it is that they're dealing with. Okay, so this really, if I'm speaking to my OT people out there, we have always been about helping people with lifestyle and daily routines and getting back to the things that are meaningful in their life, and to whatever level they can integrate movement, social connection, stress management, physical activity, we can help them do that. But there's a lot of other professions out there that do something similar or peripheral to that. That's why we have multiple disciplines out there, is because people are going to resonate with different disciplines, and then different people within those disciplines. So don't ever think that somebody is going to do it better than you. They might do it different than you, and people resonate with other people, and people will resonate with you. Okay. So lifestyle is not just good for you, but it can actually change your cell behavior. Let me scroll down here to look at what else I want to make sure I say. Okay, we're going to skip through that. So her framework, I think, helps support manual therapy approaches, movement variability interventions, myofascial self-treatment, stress-based sympathetic regulation, sensory interoceptive awareness training, programs that encourage fluid flow, like lymphatic therapists, tissue mobility. Okay, so let's talk about, we're going to skip down to, because this is getting long and I have somewhere I have to be shortly. Okay, we're going to talk about how we can explain this to a client in fairly simple terms. Okay, so first of all, we can tell people that life stress and inactivity sends constant threat signals to their bodies. When someone's in chronic stress, not moving much, sleeping poorly, eating ultra-processed foods, feeling socially disconnected, the body stays in low-grade fight or flight. It's not big dramatic stress or capital T trauma. It's background stress every day, all day. So this inactivity is sending a signal. The nervous and hormone systems stay switched on. A lot of people these days know about things like their hormones, and there's so much out there on social media about that, and they know more about their nervous systems. The brain and nervous system interprets this environment as unsafe. Stress hormones and inflammatory signals keep circulating, even when there is no injury that needs fixing. Your body's just responding to that constant state of stress. The tissue repair cells get confused. Inside the connective tissue, the fascia, there's immune cells and repair cells whose job is to clean up the damage, rebuild the tissue, and then stand down or go on their merry way. In a healthy system, they do that. In an unhealthy lifestyle, they never get the signal to finish the job, so they just keep, those fibroblasts just keep working and working and working and working. Then healing gets stuck halfway. Instead of completing the repair and returning to normal, tissues stay slightly inflamed and slightly stiff, and that can get more and more inflamed and more stiff. So Huston says this is a stalled healing process, not a broken body. Then those stiff inflamed tissues send more danger signals. Stiffer tissues move less fluid, compress nerves, alter pressure signals. Those mechanical signals tell the nervous and immune system that something is still wrong, so the inflammation continues. And then over time, the organs feel the effects. Your daily habits change the environment your cells exist in. The fascia is the environment of your cells, and cells behave differently depending on that environment. This means that lifestyle does not just affect symptoms, it affects how your cells decide whether to heal or stay inflamed. I will put that last statement in the podcast description so you have that. But this, like I said in the beginning, I think this is an article that if you pull this article, it's freely available out on the internet. You don't have to pay for it. And use bits and pieces of this in a responsible way, of course, on social media, or to communicate with your colleagues or referral sources, because there's still so many people that think that the mind and the body are still not as interconnected as we know they are. And I think this author did a really nice job of talking us through how this is so. Okay, thank you so much for listening, and I'll connect with you later. Good night. You've been listening to the Fascia-Informed Therapist Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out my continuing education courses, both online and in person. You can find them at fasciainformed.com. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to next time.